Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Seven Sage podcast. We are here every single week to help you understand the test, build better study habits, and ultimately improve your LSAT score. So, my name is Levi Grant. I'm a former live class instructor, and now I am a lead tutor here at Seven Sage. And I'm here with my good friend, my coworker, and my study partner, Emily Bashaw. So she is now a live class instructor as well. This is her very first episode on the podcast, so let's give her a warm welcome. Very, very excited to have her here. So with that in mind, I'm going to give you the mic and go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah. Hi, guys. Great to be here. My name's Emily. I also go by M. Like Levi said, I'm a live instructor at Seven Sage. Also made the same score as Levi. We made a 177 and have been tutoring for a little while now. So super glad to be here. Levi and I, like he said, have been study partners from a pretty early point in our studying and have been friends ever since then.
Absolutely, yeah. So we'll get it kicked off with how we met. I will let you take that one away. I feel like you tell the story a little bit better, so go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was looking for online communities of LSAT students like myself. And I came across on Reddit of all places, of course, not always the best place to look, but I got lucky and found this Discord community. And the person who was in charge of the Discord community, it was aimed for people who were aiming for a really high LSAT score, which is what I was aiming for. So I was trying to get myself integrated into this community to learn from all of these people who were aiming for, and in some cases, PTing at the same score that I wanted. And Levi was actually the owner of this Discord server. And one day in the server, there was a conversation about studying and being really kind of obsessed with the test. And this was something that I had read for a while that was really important to the study process and something that I had really bought into. And I had become very obsessed with the test and the process of studying and sort of the process of how to learn it very effectively. And we got into a very in-depth conversation about all of these things. And I was like, wow, there's somebody else who's thinking about these sorts of things in the level of depth that I am and doing so independently. And I reached out and sent you a friend request. And from there, I think we arranged a couple of study sessions. And from there, the rest is history. We became study partners and friends.
Absolutely, yeah. I still remember that, and I like that you bring up kind of being obsessed with the test. Just because for everyone out there listening, like we are not exaggerating. We were like obsessed with the test for a while. And like really jokes aside, I do think if you can find a way to really enjoy the test on that level and really get interested in the LSAT, not just as kind of like a means to an end, like a way to get in law school, a way to get a good score. If you can, I know it sounds cheesy, but enjoy the process, really find a way to find meaning in doing questions, learning new skills. That's such a great way to improve your score. It really, really is. So big tip that I have for that.
Yeah. Nothing but agreements from me on that end. I think we could talk about here what was like the first study session we ever had. Do you happen to remember
Absolutely.
what we did for our study session?
Yeah, I'm not sure I remember the very first one. I think it might have just been a chat, but I think one of our very helpful early exercises that we did is when we went through a section together and we took the whole thing untimed and we just tried to break down every single question in as much detail as possible. And what we were really trying to do here was kind of categorize whatever pattern or whatever trap or just kind of whatever we could recognize was going on in the question. And we really tried to sort of fit it into a box, right? Like maybe we saw a question where it took a correlation in the premises and it was concluding causation in the conclusion. Or maybe we saw a question where it had a conditional chain if x to y to z, and then it tried to say we have variable y, therefore we have variable x or something like that. Just trying to take every single question and kind of break it down in that manner and kind of categorize it. And it was so helpful for me, literally so helpful just to kind of start to really look at the test in that way and also get Swin's feedback on that. So kind of what are your memories for that?
Oh yeah. Well, I remember doing a question and we kind of put it into a box, like you said. I was like, oh, I've sort of seen something like this before. And you were like, yeah. And we kind of came up with a name for it. We wrote it down. And then we did the next question and you were like, I was about to move on. And you said, well, what pattern would you put this into? And I was like, what? Oh, we're like doing this for every question. Okay, cool. Um, so I kind of thought about it for the first time in a while, and that was a big aha moment for me. And I was like, actually, there's a few patterns that maybe this could conform to. And we both kind of took turns doing the question and bounced ideas around about what sort of patterns, and we got as creative and specific with it as we wanted in a way that I felt was very freeing. Because we didn't necessarily have to conform to any prescribed pattern. We could just sort of go, oh yeah, like this is something I've seen before. I've seen the conclusion be sort of a bait and switch from the second sentence, for instance. That could be a pattern that we saw. I've seen like this sort of specific variant of false dichotomy or sample size flaw, something like that. And we could get as into the weeds with it as we wanted. And it took us, I think, several meetings to finish that section. But by the time we did, I definitely felt like I was much more informed.
Absolutely, yeah, and I love how you're kind of talking about the specificity of it and how we weren't like super tied to specific flaws because I think that that is I think that's sometimes a trap that people can fall into, especially when they are studying very diligently. Is they're like, okay, I know all of these quote unquote common flaws, all these classic traps, and everything has to fall into one of these classic things that I've seen, right? But really, the reason that the again kind of quote unquote classic flaws exist is just because they're very common. It's because someone just like me or you or someone else out there took the time to go through and to notice these patterns. So I guess that's kind of I guess a bit of a takeaway I'd give to people listening to this is first off, actually try to look for those patterns in questions, like try and relate it to other questions that you've seen. And also don't feel like it has to fall under some sort of label or some sort of tag that you've already seen. Like, yeah, don't be afraid to get creative with it. Like, I love that whole the second sentence seemed like a bait and switch from the conclusion of the final sentence. Like, it can be as specific as you want. So, yeah, I just that was such a helpful experience. I'm like so happy to talk about that. But
Yeah. It really was, and again, it there's no time limit. I think this is a great segue to talk about the importance of untimed work, where it's don't be afraid in your study process to just get in the weeds with analysis and review because, if you rush through a certain question or many questions, you may end up missing very important wisdom that might come from any of those questions.
absolutely, yeah, and that's I think that I think that's something that I feel like we both did a pretty good job on, is I feel like we really committed to, like, let's do untimed work first, and let's really analyze these questions, and I think that's at least from my perspective, like, let me know if you disagree, but I feel like that's part of what made the LSAT so exciting for us was really that analysis portion, like, not just doing a question and getting it right, but really trying to I kinda like to think of it as, like, playing LSAT engineer and trying to break it down into all of its component parts and like seeing how it all fits together. Like I feel like we both really got a kick out of that. And I think that was super, super helpful. So
Well, you remember that one question that we did, it was me and my friend in the library, and then you were on the other end of the call, and we talked for, I think, a couple hours about what is sort of the argument flow of this question? What are some different ways that we could categorize how this argument is working together? I think it was the frying pan question.
oh yeah, oh my yes, the frying pan question, very much so. For anyone wondering, I think that's what is it, PT 158? It's a necessary assumption question that's like question like 23 or 24 in one of the LRs. Anyway, great question. Sorry to interrupt.
Is sounding here, but yes, I think it's something like that. It's something about warranties on frying pans.
Yeah, yeah, and it's I remember that one as well. Just because we yeah, that really is a good point in jogging my memory. Like, I feel like we understood the question even probably pretty well after like the 25 to 30-minute mark, but it was just such an atypical question that we really tried to figure out like what does make this one tick? What are the learnings that we can take away from this one and then apply to future questions? And like I think that's just a really good piece of actionable advice as well is when you are looking at a question, even when you get it right and feel like you understand it, there's still probably more to take away from it. Like that was something I feel like we both, like a mindset we both really committed to was there is, I mean, hours worth of learning that can happen in every single individual questions, like not being afraid to kind of do that detailed work when it needs to happen.
Absolutely. I mean, everyone loves to say quality over quantity, but I think we took it to an extreme that most people I encountered maybe didn't. Um, and that is a little bit hard to buy into because it feels counterintuitive and maybe a little bit like you're missing the opportunity to do other things. But in the end, I think that we learned a lot from a very small sample size of questions, maybe a couple hundred questions over the time we studied together, that we were able to make so generalizable to the rest of the test that I think it was some of the most productive studying that I did.
I completely agree. Also, as a quick disclaimer, like Im said, we probably did take it to an extreme. I'm not sure we're necessarily recommending everyone go that far in that direction, but just to give you an idea that yeah, like it really is quality over quantity. Like a fun statistic I always like to throw out is I studied for 8 months. I studied a lot. I only took 12 PTs in that time, like full PTs, and I did a handful of other PTs worth of just like drilling material. But it really is kind of that quality quantity. But yeah, I think this is a nice segue, I think, to talk about something else. You know, when we were studying, not only also hi cat, I'm not sure if we can see it on the other screen. Im has a wonderful cat, but um, I think something that we were also really committed to was trying to get very creative in how we studied. Like not just saying, okay, this is how other people have studied, this is how I'm looking at questions, like really trying to find new ways to learn and like ways that work best for us. So yeah, kind of what are your thoughts on that? Or if like you remember that whole process?
Well, so this is one of the things that we bonded over so much in the beginning was we both were very independently engrossed in the idea of intentional practice is what it's called. So the idea of intentional practice is that you are being intentional about the way that you approach problems in a way that is not just pure rote repetition, but you are conducting sort of active analysis about your own problem solving and maybe even some meta analysis about the learning that you're doing and how effective your practices are. And I think that you probably have a better way to describe this than I do. I was reading a lot of literature about it at the time, but you had a lot of personal experience with this because of your music.
The way I like to think about it, or at least the way I kind of thought about it when I was doing a lot more music, was at the end of every day or week or whatever. Like I would always just try and take a little bit of time to think, okay, for however I practiced this week, like how many hours, the time of day, what drills was I doing, what exercises was I doing, what scales was I playing for music. I'd always try to think, okay, do I notice progress at this point? And if so, how can I replicate that process? What was I doing that went well, and how can I do more of that? Or more commonly, as is what happens most of the time, that didn't go well. Like I need to kind of course correct and I need to figure out something else moving forward. And because I kind of think we've talked a fair amount on the podcast and just at Seven Sage about the importance of review and analyzing individual questions and how important that is. But I think oftentimes people are a little bit more hesitant to, like you said, kind of do that meta analysis, like go the next step out and really say, okay, not just on the question level, reviewing what I'm doing, but reviewing like your own review process, like reviewing your own learning process. So yeah, I remember talking so much with you about that. I feel like it was so helpful to like both of our journeys.
Well, it was really refreshing to see that somebody else was also thinking about these things at the same time that I was. I kind of was like, oh, maybe I'm the only one who I've really encountered at least who thinks about these things this way. But the fact that you did as well made it really easy to talk to you about studying and to ultimately conduct a bunch of study sessions together where we tried really creative things like we would kind of create different drills and try them. We would do sections in certain ways and we would talk about that. We would talk about things that we had reviewed. We I think came up with some kind of unconventional ideas about how to study that not all of them panned out, but some of them were very helpful. And we also talked a lot about just how we would review what sorts of things we were taking away from questions. And I think that this is like a good point to maybe segue into the differences in our study philosophy and how we kind of influenced each other as we were studying as well.
Yeah, we definitely did start off at different instances as well. And I also do want to say, just like you said, it was kind of exciting to talk to someone who's focused on that. It was very enjoyable for me too to really talk to someone who's like committed to the whole learning process. Like really, and it's kind of a nerdy thing. Like, oh my goodness, how do I learn better? Like, what's my learning style? But it was very exciting for me as well. But yeah, I think
When it comes to the LSAT, what specifically are we talking about? Maybe we should specify.
Yeah, that's fair. What helps people learn better? Kind of a useful, at least for me, kind of a useful metric that I came up with was whenever I was studying, I was always trying to put myself right on the edge of like what I felt like my brain could handle. Like, a very common complaint I hear from students when they study is they're going through questions and they're just like, I don't know, my brain feels fried. Like I just feel like I can't keep all the information together, stuff like that. And I very firmly believe, I think that's really exactly where you need to be. Like if you're pushing your brain to that level and if you're thinking that deeply, like you're going to learn more stuff. So maybe that's not an exact answer to your question, but I think that's a pretty useful metric to kind of gauge how effectively you're learning is like, does it feel like you are pushing yourself and does it feel like you have to think hard to kind of make that next step? So
I think that that's a great way to put it. And that's a good metric, I think, for people. For me, I was trying to, like I said, strive for intentional practice. And I'd had some examples of what intentional practice looked like. And I knew what it wasn't, which is repetition. I knew that I shouldn't just be doing repetition, but I was trying to come up with different ways to intentionally study for the LSAT. And I came up with a couple different things. The first, and I think most common way that people intentionally practice is deep review. So review where you're not just saying, oh, I misread this question, whatever, but you're either coming up with something that is a new concept that you have learned through this question, something new that the LSAT values. Like an example of this is one time I saw two different answer choices. One said sufficient for necessary, one said necessary for sufficient. And one of them was right. And so I learned that the LSAT treats those things differently. That's something new that I learned that will help me on another question. Or if it's something where, for instance, I misread, I'm thinking to myself, okay, could I have gotten this right without a solution? And if so, what am I doing in the process of getting this right that is not looking at the solution? Did I reread the conclusion? Did I reread the question stem? Is that something I could have done on this question before answering? So coming up with a very concrete, either lesson learned or actionable takeaway. That's sort of first way to intentionally practice. And then the second thing that I came up with was different variations on trying to think like the test writers. So, learning how to write questions, writing my own questions, doing a deep analysis on different patterns that were going on in the answer choices or the stimulus, and trying to sort of emulate that myself, come up with my own examples. I would go on YouTube and I would research the people who wrote the test and see what they had to say. So, there were a bunch of different things I was doing to try and intentionally practice and creating my own drills and things like that. And I think that this was something that as we talked, we did this together. This was sort of the impetus for a lot of these unconventional exercises that we did.
I also I like what you said on that. Like I remember you did get really, really good at I feel like knowing what the test makers wanted. Like I feel like that's something I really struggled with when we first started studying together. Was this is something I mentioned in previous podcasts, but I was very mechanical in how I looked at the test, and oftentimes I would sort of miss the forest for the trees a little bit. And yeah, you really had this great sense of like what do they actually want me to do in this question. And I think it's great. You like you said, you were doing intentional things to help develop that skill, like looking at what the test makers have to say about the test and like really approaching questions through that angle. I also remember something that you said that was helpful was you would go through a lot of the very, very old PTs and they're still useful questions to go through, but they're if you've studied the LSAT a lot, those very, very early questions, they feel a little bit different. And sometimes they're maybe not as clear as some of the earlier or as some of the later questions. And I remember you saying that kind of having to figure out how to parse those earlier questions was kind of helpful in like figuring out like the intent of what the test makers want. So anyway, just kind of jog my memory on that.
Yeah, no, it was interesting. I did take several old PTs just to see what they would be like. Just again, I was sort of doing things for fun, as we both were. Just whatever seemed like it would be fun that day. And one week I decided to take some old PTs, and it was very interesting how unformulaic they were. And yet, I feel like there were several questions that, despite not being as tightly and neatly structured as modern questions, they revealed a lot about the philosophy of the test and what the test makers are looking for. in the reasoning for why an answer is right. So I did think that was a valuable experience, but probably not as valuable as looking at modern tests if you're I'm not necessarily recommending anybody do that. I also think conversely, you were really influential in my study process. A lot of questions are easier to look at through that more mechanical lens. Not that it's bad to look at it one way or another, but if you're looking at it through this sort of just, okay, I see a conditional statement, or I can see that this is a causal structure, that sort of thing, you can get a lot more efficient if you recognize that's a pattern early on. And I think that more mechanistic approach was very influential for me in terms of helping bring me a little more center as well and incorporating that into my studying.
Yeah, I feel like we did meet each other at a really good time. You know, I was way off into everything's mechanical, and I think you were way off into nothing is mechanical. And I feel like we kind of helped like develop those separate approaches because, like, at least for me, when I go through questions, I really do ask myself that question, like, do I need to approach this one like very ABC, very structured, or do I need to, kind of zoom out a little bit, treat it more like a more organic thing. So anyway, I do feel like we kind of helped bring each other a little bit in line with that. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about just kind of some of our favorite study memories. But sort of last thing I want to say on all of that is for anyone out there listening, I think a good takeaway from this discussion is that we were both very willing and maybe sometimes too willing to just try something totally new. And just try and figure out something that might be helpful for us. And like Em said, a lot of it didn't work. We both tried a lot of stuff that just honestly wasn't that helpful. But the things that we did find that were effective for us, and the things that we did find that were helpful, more than made up for the effort. And I think it really helped us develop a better understanding of the test and a deeper understanding of the test. So I guess that's kind of the last nugget I'll leave you guys with is don't be afraid to try new stuff and don't be afraid to learn something that you haven't seen in a curriculum or you haven't seen in a book, right? Don't be afraid to come up with like your own takeaways and your own learnings from that. But okay, well, we'll kind of talk about the fun stuff now. Do you have some kind of favorite memories from our study process?
I think my favorite memory from our study process was finding out that I had met your sister. Actually, this is like not even like this was just a random coincidence. That I had met Levi's sister at a camp that I attended, so that was funny. But in terms of studying, the memory I think I look back on the most fondly is when I told you that I had just figured out how to diagram, and you were like, "Oh yeah," and you were so nice about it at the time. And I look back on this with a little bit of embarrassment, but also with, I think, it really just reflects how differently we were approaching the test, even though we had such a similar philosophy about how we were approaching the process of studying.
Yeah, no, and I remember that. And also I will say just for anyone listening as well, that's in my opinion not an uncommon thing at all. I think oftentimes you find people that are like even scoring around the 170s mark and maybe haven't quite cracked the whole diagramming code. So if anyone relates with that, no worries with that. It totally happens. But this is my quick plug for diagramming. It genuinely is very helpful. I initially was like at the very first was like very anti-diagramming. I was just like, I'll figure everything out intuitively. Diagramming, it's a pain to learn at first. It really can help you, and it is a different way to view the test and can kind of help you learn better. But anyway, yeah, that was a good memory as well. I would say I think one of my favorite ones is, and maybe this isn't as specific, but I just remember we had a lot of we just kind of talked a lot about the test, like not even necessarily about questions. Like I remember just hopping onto Discord calls and just saying like, oh, like how would you study this or how would you approach this concept or like not even having a super structured topic, but just kind of talking about the test and like getting into the weeds on it. And I really feel like even though those types of discussions weren't as geared towards specific strategies or specific questions, just kind of having that like higher level look at the test as a whole, it was first it was really fun, but I also feel like it was helpful to get some to get a deeper understanding of just like a wide variety of things.
Yeah, I think definitely I look back very fondly on a lot of the conversations that I was having with you, especially because it was not something that I felt like I knew how to explain to a lot of people who were important to me and a part of my life, but were not involved in the LSAT study process. So it was nice to have somebody who I could discuss these things that were becoming a very important part of my life, but I didn't really know how to express to other people.
And same thing here. Like, I think we both struggled to articulate it a little bit at first, and I feel like that was helpful for the both of us, both in figuring out how to actually explain this concept to another person, but also just, do I even know what I'm talking about? How do I explain this to myself, right? I think that is a nice segue into kind of the teaching side of things. Just because again, you are one of our recent live class instructors, class cheers for that. Congratulations. And so I think we can talk a little bit about like your own experience learning how to teach the LSAT, getting interested in teaching that. So yeah, just kind of tell me when did you first decide you wanted to teach the LSAT, be a tutor, go down this whole route, and kind of what did you find helpful? Like what helped you develop that skill?
Well, this is very relevant to the topic of the podcast today, actually, because I think I first decided I wanted to tutor when I found out that that was something you could do. I was on the Seven Sage site, and when you make a 170 something on a PT, they will send you a little message like, "Hey, when you take your real test, consider applying for Seven Sage." And I found out that that was an option. I was like, "Wow, that would be a really great thing to do. I already really like the test. I wonder if that could be an option for me." And as I was meeting you and other people who were in your community that you created, I realized that other people were taking this very seriously. You and some other people who we were mutually friends with were all talking about how you were sort of doing things online for free at the time, even though you hadn't taken your official test yet. You were giving some kind of guidance online for free just to practice the idea of teaching and how to teach this test specifically. And I remember thinking, "Oh, I should be doing that too." So getting into teaching, even as I was scoring pretty highly but hadn't taken my test, doing some things online for free, doing some online classes even for free, just to like give myself that experience. And I think that that translated very well over to the live classes that I've been doing. I had met you and other people like you who were experimenting with doing a little bit of free teaching and guidance online and thought, man, I should probably be doing that too because I want to be competitive for these kinds of jobs. I really treated teaching like it was its own separate skill and was able to be really fortunate to learn from people like you who were in the process of doing that yourself. You had some experience teaching music and I was able to pick your brain a lot about what is it that makes for effective teaching strategies? How do you teach people these different concepts like sufficient and necessary? And then eventually develop my own style for that, both for one on one and for groups. And as I've become more integrated into the Seven Sage Live class community, I've been able to both learn a lot about my own personal sort of teaching philosophy and develop that even further and also learn from some really incredible people like Bailey and Henry, as well as you, who are just excellent, excellent teachers who really know what they're doing and can't say enough good things about the live classes. I attended a few when I was studying, but it was a resource that I probably could have made even better use of. There's some people on there, not necessarily including myself, but there's people on there who just really know what they're talking about and are really effective at teaching these concepts, highlighting these different patterns that Levi and I have been talking about that you just start to understand a lot more as you've been studying the LSAT and making those lessons super generalizable to other questions. So if you're looking for that more quality over quantity approach and also just a lot of positive vibes in general, the live classes are a really great place to start. The instructors are going to deep dive into these questions in a very similar way that Levi and I were doing our deep dive when we were doing our section and are going to talk about patterns that we all see in these questions, how to make those patterns generalizable, different takeaways that maybe we had from certain questions and from certain question types as well. And I think that that's a super valuable resource.
Okay, but okay. First off, give yourself more credit. You absolutely are a good teacher. You're very, very good at explaining these concepts. I think you're really great at what you do. And you're very kind to say that I helped out, but you absolutely helped me out as well. I mean, just being able to talk about like different teaching strategies, how to communicate these things. I remember bouncing off different analogies and examples with you was so helpful, and you had some really great input on that. I also will shout out the other live class instructors as well. They were a great resource in helping me learn how to become an effective teacher. I'll give a quick shout out to Bailey as well. She was very, very kind just to offer up a lot of her time when I was trying to learn how to do that. So very, very, very helpful for that as well. Okay. Yeah. With that in mind, I think we'll just kind of wrap up with some sort of takeaways from kind of our discussion here today. So I think well, we'll kind of go back and forth with this. I think the first takeaway that I would say is just don't be afraid to try something new. It doesn't have to be something you've read in a prep resource. It doesn't have to be something that someone told you. Just try something that you think might work. And if it works, great, congratulations, that's awesome. And if it doesn't, no worries, just try something else. So don't be afraid to get a little bit experimental with it.
Yeah. I think sort of the obvious takeaway for me is find a study partner. Don't be afraid to reach out to people. You're not always necessarily going to find like the perfect person who is going to share your exact philosophy. People are going to bring different approaches to you that they might be approaching this test a little bit differently. And that's not a bad thing. That's an opportunity to learn from that person about what they're doing that's helping them succeed and maybe incorporate it into your own study process.
And completely agree. And like, even outside of the fact that those people can have different experiences and perspectives that can be helpful, at least for me, it was just so nice just to have some people that were just in the process, that I could complain to, like, oh my goodness, I did worse than my last PT. The world is over. People say, actually, it's okay, man. Don't worry about it. So I think that was really helpful. Yeah, I think, another good takeaway is even as you are trying to experiment and try different things, like Em did a great job of highlighting, be very intentional with that, right? Have a goal in what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish. Don't just say, I'm going to do 5 sufficient assumption questions. Say, I'm going to do 5 sufficient assumption questions, and I'm specifically going to focus on the strength of language in the conclusion and how that's going to help me in the answer choices, right? So set yourself those very tangible, very concrete, very intentional goals. Love that word, to kind of help your process and like help give you some guidance when you're studying.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably final takeaway from my end would be just quality over quantity. Don't try to drill 100 questions in a day. Try to drill as many questions in a day as you can effectively study and review properly.
Absolutely. And I guess final one from my end. We didn't discuss it so much, but I think it's super, super helpful. We both gave ourselves a very long timeline. And I think for anyone aiming super, super high, give yourself a long timeline. I know that's not what people want to hear. They want to hear, oh, yes, studying for the test in 2 months is a great plan to get a 175 plus. But it's not, unfortunately. I couldn't have done it in 2 months, definitely not. So maybe there's someone out there that can do it, but just if you are aiming for those really, really high scores, plan to give yourself that long timeline. Um, don't feel like it's the first test or die. Just make sure you're giving yourself that time so you can kind of gain that experience and do all those kind of strategies and things that we've talked about. Okay, so with that in mind, Emily, thank you so much for joining us. I, of course, know you, but I'm very, very happy that everyone else gets to learn a little bit more about you, one of our wonderful instructors here. So for everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us today. As always, make sure to comment, subscribe, check out all of Seven Stages' other services. We have LSAT prep. We have, of course, the live classes. Yay, go live classes. We have courses, admissions, consulting, tutoring, all of that good stuff. The LSAT, it is definitely hard. It's definitely difficult. But we will do our absolute best to help you crush it, help you figure out how to get those scores. Okay. So with that in mind, thank you so much again for coming, Emily. You've been absolutely awesome. And for everyone else, I hope you have a good day and I hope you guys are able to stay warm as well.